Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry Geller. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of Kokua Council. We have a really important speaker and an important topic to cover. And I know that you've come to hear Henry Curtis speak, and you know who he is, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. In the newsletter, I wrote that Henry is the Executive Director and Vice President of Life of the Land, which is a Hawaii-based environmental and community action group founded in 1970. But you need to know a little more. Henry is the one who goes to the Public Utilities Commission on our behalf. The PUC is kind of an esoteric organization for most people. We know how to go to the legislature and submit testimony and speak, okay, but the PUC isn't like that. It's a different kind of bureaucracy. It's like the FCC in Washington. And in order to be successful there, you need to know how it works. Henry knows how it works, and he goes there, and he acts as, in many ways, as our representative for the PUC, and he does a lot more. But I think that's important to know, because no description that just says somebody's an executive director even comes close to describing what it is that he can do so expertly for us. So today, Henry's going to speak about, should HECO be converted into electric cooperatives? Maybe there's more to this than the title explains. So I'd like to welcome Henry to Kokua Council. And we're not only anxious to hear what you have to say, but I'm sure there are quite a number of questions that people might have.
Aloha. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on the issue and then switch to co-ops and then open it up for Q&A. And I like to start by pointing out that energy right now on a global level accounts for between 8 and 12% of the total world finance, fossil fuels. So it's a very significant player throughout the economy. And fossil fuels are the #1 causer of health impacts in the United States. The United States spends $200 billion a year on health-related accidents and injuries and problems. That excludes climate change. That excludes a lot of different impacts, but just major impacts are $200 billion a year in health. Fossil fuels are also the #1 causer of pollution in the world. And they're the #1 causer of climate change. So on multiple levels, it's really important that we wrap ourselves around energy issues. And if we look back in 25 years ago, there have been sort of 3 revolutions that have occurred that are prior to the energy revolution. The first being personal computers. I don't know how we would all get along in this world without personal computers. The second one was cell phones. Of course, what would we do without our cell phone? And the third is the internet. All revolutions that have occurred in our lifetime. And energy is the current revolution going on. And it's sort of a convergence of 5 different forces that are currently affecting us. And I don't know of anybody who predicted even 2 of them before they occurred. And right now it's a convergence of 5. First and foremost, I guess, is the growth of liquefied natural gas, which just a few years ago, everybody was talking about peak oil and the rising price of oil and how it was going to price us out of existence. And suddenly there's natural gas around, which has totally changed the paradigm. The second is solar. Solar installations globally have been growing at more than 40% per year for 15 years. Imagine putting money in the bank and getting a 40% rate of return for 15 years. It started very, very small, so nobody noticed it. It's just sort of broken through the ice layer in the last year or so. It's about 1% of the world's energy right now comes from solar. But at a 40% growth rate, it would only take a decade or a decade and a half to be everything. And that has sent shockwaves through the fossil fuel industry. That here it is, solar is cheaper than fossil fuels right now in many parts of the world, and it's growing at 40% per year. The fossil fuel industry is totally alarmed. The third is greenhouse gases and climate change, which more and more of the world is becoming aware that it exists, and it's a major problem. The fourth is batteries and energy storage, which is still in its infancy today, but is on the verge of taking off and will change everything. And the fifth deals with the public utilities commissions around the world and its rate design. How do you design rates that are fair to everybody in a world that is changing so rapidly that nobody can figure out what is coming? In addition, there are what I would term science fiction. 3 things that 5 years ago you would have said, yes, that's science fiction, but indicates, again, rapidly changing circumstances. One of them is the fact that you no longer need transmission lines to transfer electricity. So we're all hooked up and wired, our houses, all our computers are wired to the wall, but right now you no longer need a bundle of wires to move electricity around. In fact, it was even shown that you could beam electricity from Maui to the Big Island. Think about that, beaming between islands instead of using transmission lines. The second is the solar plane. The fact that we're actually able to go around the world on a solar plane, but even more so, you can put solar panels on the bottom sides of wings of airplanes. And you might say, why would you put them away from the sun? The fact is you can beam lasers at the underside of airplane wings to recharge them, so you don't need fancy, powerful engines on the plane themselves. And that has been tested and proven, so that one day you may not need huge rocket ships packing large amounts of fuel, because you just have solar panels on the bottom side, and you keep recharging them from planes at different heights. And you can shoot things into space from just without having their own fuel on them. And the third, I find really amazing, is a few years ago we were talking about bringing in a car company to Hawaii that could have a quickly changing battery, a battery that you'd pull into a gas station, drop the battery out, put a new battery in, and drive off. And therefore, we were talking about how in just a few minutes you could recharge your car without actually having to plug it in. But in Europe, they're actually testing having wires underneath roadways. So as the car drives down the road, it is being recharged. And think about that, because if one of the arguments against getting off the grid is what happens if your house, if it rains for 2 or 3 days, it's cloudy, you just can't get your battery to provide enough energy. But if you can just drive down to the 7-Eleven and charge your car on the way down and charge your car on the way up, and then plug your car into your house, it suddenly changes everything. So as we look around the world and we look at who is testing some of these radical concepts coming in, a lot of people point to Iceland, but Iceland is using geothermal and hydroelectric, and they have a lot of that, so that's not something that's easily transportable between models. Germany has a lot of renewables, but they're connected to the European grid, and therefore they export to 4 countries when they have excess wind and solar. They import from 4 countries. New York is testing after Hurricane Sandy, building a whole bunch of microgrids, so that if the major grid goes down, you can have microgrids operating in different places. California is testing having large amounts of solar and wind centrally put into the grid. But it is Hawaii, of all places in the world that is testing distributed solar. The fact that we have 50,000 solar systems on roofs and another 20,000 which have been authorized and are being constructed in the future, we'll have 70,000 rooftop solar systems. That is something unheard of around the world. And if you look at the amount of intermittent wind and intermittent solar going onto our grids, we're 10 times higher right now than any other place in the United States. So we are sort of the cutting edge testing area to determine how you integrate large amounts of solar and wind into the grid. That is probably why NextEra wants to come here. NextEra is not stupid. They operate Florida Power and Light, which they proclaim that in the year 2024, Florida Power and Light will reach 1% renewable. Yes, 1% in 2024. They also have large wind farms and some solar farms that are centrally put in around the United States. But in terms of their utility, they don't like to see a bunch of rooftop solar pop up. And since we're testing the ideas of all these solar coming on, a large utility like them would want to come in and, one, get the patents, if there are any patents on how you integrate solar, and two, discover ways of getting utilities to block more rooftop solar from coming in. So they gain both ways. They gain on the patents, and they gain on trying to figure out how to block the coming new era. So one of the interesting things in the current fight before the PUC and NextEra, we had NextEra come in and join forces with Hawaiian Electric and its subsidiaries, Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company. So there are 4 applicants in the process, and the consumer advocate. So, and then there were 29 interveners, of which 4 have dropped out. So right now we have 30 parties in the proceedings. And I've estimated we have about 150,000 pages of documents, which leads one to having to either learn data management, know data management, or be overwhelmed by data. And 2/3 of the pages are confidential at different levels, which adds enormous complexity. So originally, a number of parties proposed to the Public Utilities Commission that we look at alternative models before PUC takes on the NextEra issue. We should look at co-ops, we should look at municipal utilities, we should understand how the utility is moving forward before we decide who it should be married to. That is, you might want to know if you were going to get married, what your job was before you were deciding to get married, so in case you decided you wanted to be a South Pole expert and travel down there, you don't marry someone who's glued to Greenland. So part of it is finding out where you're going and what you're doing. And the Public Utilities Commission said, no, we really should focus on whether NextEra is the right partner for Hawaiian Electric. But they've sort of come around now and realized that that doesn't entirely work. So they've decided to let a discussion of co-ops go on, a discussion of municipals, a discussion of liquefied natural gas. So there are dozens of issues being decided within the proceeding, which makes it, again, extremely complex, more complex than Hawaii's had in anything that we've ever done before. We have more parties than Waihole fight. We have dozens of more law firms involved, and we have a much, much shorter time frame. So one of the models being proposed is a municipal utility as an alternative to NextEra. And we can use an example of the Board of Water Supply here. Of would you want the Board of Water Supply, would you want a Board of Electric Supply? Or would you want a Board of Water and Electric Supply? I mean, if they're delivering water, why not deliver both? An alternative is a co-op model. And one of the examples is Kauai Island Utility Co-op. Around 2000, Citizens Utility Company of Connecticut ran the Kauai Electric Division grid. And they decided to restructure and refocus and to bail out of Kauai. And therefore, a group of citizens came together and formed Kauai Island Utility Co-op and made a bid on the utility in 2000 and brought it to the Public Utilities Commission. And it was rejected because the price was too high. It would have hurt Kauai ratepayers. So Kauai Island Utility Co-op renegotiated with the seller, and in 2002 brought a separate proposal to the PUC, which was accepted. Now, initially, KIUC went through a lot of difficulties in the early years because most cooperatives in the United States that own electricity, that distribute electricity, either distribute it or generate it. They don't do both. With the exception of a few Indian tribes and a few co-ops in Alaska, Kauai was the first one that owned both generation, transmission, and distribution. So that one of the things was trying to get the Kauai board to be up to speed on how to handle issues. So it took them a few years to go through the getting adjusted to running a co-op. And then for several years, at the time that Kauai Island Utility Co-op came into force, Kauai had the highest rates in the state. And it took them a number of years to bring down the rates to the point where they're now comparable to the rates that Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light charge. So they have been able to lower their rates and to have a downward trend and to lower to match the neighbor islands, which has been great. They've also been able to bring on renewables at a faster pace than the Hawaii Electric companies because they don't have the shareholder versus ratepayer, management versus non-management. They don't have all of those headaches that HECO has, and therefore they've been able to bring on renewables a lot faster. They've had a few issues that they're still trying to resolve. One of them deals with PUC oversight. The Public Utilities Commissions around the nation generally do not regulate co-ops. Because of the deal struck in Kauai, our PUC was able to exercise some control over KIUC. But that's put into the contract when the co-op was set up, and it's still being worked out. The two issues that the co-op needs still to figure out deal with voting. Right now on Kauai, if you look around and you say, gee, Hawaii doesn't have a very good track record on voting. We only have half of our people actually turning out and voting. And when people voted for the Board of Education, the rates were even lower because most people didn't follow education, and therefore only like a third of eligible voters voted in education. Co-ops, how many people are really interested in co-ops? First, it's not who uses electricity, it's only whose name the meter is in. And only 21% of the people whose name the meter was in voted in the last KIUC election. So that has presented a problem of how you encourage more and more people within the population to care about energy issues. And in addition, both businesses and individuals can vote in elections. So you could wind up having businesses vote the board in and not having as much weight for residences. So a lot of it, those are issues that KIUC is working on but struggling through. And the question is how, if a co-op were to come in and take over HECO, how you would encourage more people to vote. The other question is, what size do you make the co-op? Do you have one co-op for the entire HECO companies? Do you have one co-op for Oahu and one for Maui County and one for Hawaii County? Do you have 3 co-ops for Maui, one for each island? Do you break up co-ops and make them even smaller? Do you have one for downtown Honolulu and one for Waianae? And these are issues wrestling with, because as the price of solar right now is going like this, the price of solar is dropping rapidly, and the prices of batteries are dropping rapidly. And if they continue on their current trend, in 5 or 10 years, nobody would be connected to the grid because it would be much cheaper not to be connected. So do you invest in a grid that might become extinct in 10 years? Or do you encourage everybody who can leave to leave and help those who can't afford to leave, help them to leave? So these are thorny issues being discussed. And so we're at sort of the very beginning of the discussion of co-ops and whether co-ops can step in, whether they can take a part of the grid or not. And for example, Camp Smith in Aiea has 3 microgrids on base. They have a microgrid, so in case the HECO grid goes down, they can stay up. Then they have 2 microgrids inside of their microgrid. So in case their microgrid fails, 2 critical components within their system can stay up. So you may have a series of embedded microgrids, and you may have a lot of people leaving or staying. And all of that is challenging the PUC and challenging everybody to figure out where we're going. But it's really critical that we all get involved in this, because the worst thing that we can do is sit on the sidelines, figure out that a storm is coming, we watch from the sidelines, and we don't like what arrives. So it's critical, whether it's climate change, whether it's nature of the grid, whether it's how much we pay for electricity, whether it's health impacts, whether it's voting rights, all of that will be decided in the near future, and we all must be involved.
Henry, you mentioned earlier municipal as one option, but your talk has been primarily about co-ops, and you've given us some idea about the problems that co-ops face. In your own view, is the co-op model superior to the municipal model, or vice versa, or neither one, and why?
In general, in the United States, the largest utilities that sell electricity are shareholder utilities. The medium-sized companies are municipals, and the small companies are co-ops. Now, there are some overlap in size. I don't want to say that there's no overlap there. But in general, co-ops also have far more larger geographical areas per co-op than shareholder-owned utilities. They own entire rural areas. They're just filled of long, stretching out distribution lines owned by co-ops. So examples, probably the best example of a municipal area is Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD. They're a very forward-thinking municipal utility that roughly coincides with the county of Sacramento, the Sacramento area. LA Power, Water, and LAPD, whatever it is, Los Angeles has a single utility that is citywide owned that covers water and power. Similar to the way that telephones used to be just you call people up, and now they're cameras, and now they're storage, and now they're internet connectors and everything else, and even I've seen people use them as flashlights. There are utilities which are blurring the lines between the type of service they provide. There are some utilities that provide water, electricity, heat, and telecommunications. So it may be possible that the electric service provider of the future is also the phone service provider of the future. There's a blurring of lines. But in general, co-ops works best when they're small. The average co-op in the United States has between 10,000 and 50,000 customers. They range from around 1,000 or 1,500 at the bottom up to, there's 3 or 4 that exceed 100,000. But there's certainly no co-op in the United States the size of Oahu. On the other hand, there are many municipal utilities that are just small towns of a few thousand customers up to a couple million. So there are ranges. Maui County is thinking of setting up a municipal utility to run their electric utility. So there has been some talk on Oahu, and there's some split and some indication that the mayoral race coming up will be interesting, because Ernie Martin, chair of the council, wants to run for mayor, and he's talking about alternative structures. For example, it might be a municipal, and the mayor is saying, no, 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 we shouldn't be going there. Many people use batteries for the term energy storage. Battery means a chemical energy storage system. And energy storage is much bigger. 90% of all the storage on the US grid is hydro. You pump water up and you drop it when you need it. So 90% is pump storage, and everything else is 10%. Pumped hydro has existed for more than 100 years. Everything else is fairly new, but there's people promoting everything from ammonia to hydrogen to lithium batteries to lead acid. There's all kinds of different options, and compressed air is one of them. I mean, you all, as a kid, blow up a balloon and let it go and watch the air pop out and the balloon take off, and you can do that to power electricity. But the point is, on the current US grid, if you were to turn off all the generators and see how long the batteries last, how long the energy storage lasts on the US grid, it would last for around 1/10 of a second. So there's a lot of room for growth. And the question is, a lot of companies are pouring in tremendous amounts of money into it, because once you solve the battery issue, you transform everything, and you might even make the grid obsolete. So whoever can make the breakthrough stands to reap huge rewards.
Speaking of making the grid obsolete, people can put solar panels on their roofs if they own a house or rent a house, but you got condos and industrial users who don't have the roof area to put up solar, so they're going to be dependent upon the grid for a long time. If you have a co-op regime, how is it managed? Do the industrial folks have a say in rates and how the co-op is managed? Do the condos have a say? And what about people who are mostly off the grid because they have solar panels on their roof? Should they have an equal say to those who are big-time users?
The way KIUC, Kauai Island Utility Co-op, operates is each meter gets one vote. So if you're a hotel and you have 10% of the load of the island, and one person is a renter and turns on a switch occasionally, they have equal votes. Of course, the management doesn't treat them equally, because they know if one of those two leave, one will have a lot greater impact than the other. And therefore, even though you have one vote, you have more than one equivalent vote. There are sort of 4 things that I think about when people say that condos don't have enough roof space. One, I've seen awnings that you put over a window to shade the direct sunlight coming in the window, and the awning has a solar panel on it. Second, I've seen companies that will sell you a portable solar panel that you can hang off your lanai or take with you camping. Third, people have figured out a way of putting solar on a window so that it collects the electricity hitting the window, the EMF force from the sun, brings it to the side of the window and converts it to electricity. The window remains clear going through. And And people are beginning to look at solar paint, where you can paint the side of a building to power it. And if a condo is tall but not very much roof space, you just paint the side with solar paint. So there's a lot of different technologies coming. And I often picture that co-ops are more talking about why we can't do it than why we can or what the options are. In addition, temporarily, for now, there are gas pipes bringing gas throughout urban Honolulu from Campbell Industrial Park. So if you wanted to put solar on your roof and supplement it with gas as a way of disconnecting from electricity from the grid, you could do that. There are many, many different options. They're coming. Obviously, if you live in a tall building with a small roof space, you're disadvantaged in that way, but there are many other possibilities. And co-ops should be thinking about, how do I apply for a grant to do something really wild to show the world that co-ops can do it differently?
I appreciate your imagination. What caught my ear was the 1 meter, 1 vote idea. And it seemed to me to be a nightmare, because even HECO is apparently not aware of the fact that many of their condominiums, each owner of the condominium owns 2 meters. 1 individually, 1 collectively. And the problem is, who represents the collective one? Of course, you'd think almost automatically that would be the condo board. And now you see where you've just moved this conflict to the politics of people who are trying to be good neighbors and realizing that their collective interest versus their individual interests, they're fighting against themselves.
I agree. And another issue, for example, is I rent. The electricity is part of the rent. So I would not be a voter if there was a co-op on this island. And in addition, if you have a business and a resident, you get 2 votes. For another business might be 10 times the size of yours, and they would get 1 vote. So all of those decisions on how you vote and whether the Public Utilities Commission has oversight over it to handle conflicts within different blocks, all of that needs to be put into the Constitution and the bylaws of whatever co-op comes about. And therefore, part of it is not just electricity, but part of it is a discussion on democracy and participation. And therefore, that becomes extremely critical on how it's structured. And under the current rules that we operate, the Public Utilities Commission decides anything to do with a utility, any rate charged by a utility or any expense they want to recover from ratepayers has to be approved by the Public Utilities Commission. And the Hawaii Supreme Court has ruled that if you want to object to something done by the Public Utilities Commission, it is necessary but not sufficient that you participated in that decision. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to actually get into the docket. So, for example, in the 1960s, Hawaiian Electric ran a campaign to ask people to increase their use of electricity. And in 1971, they approached the PUC and said, we want to pass the cost of those ad campaigns on to ratepayers. And Life and Land filed a motion to intervene. We were denied but allowed to participate through the consumer advocate. In the end of the day, we convinced the PUC staff it was a bad idea, but the commission ruled that the ad campaign had to be paid for by ratepayers. We appealed, and at that time the appeal went directly to the Supreme Court. The PUC argued before the Supreme Court that because they had not allowed us into the proceeding, we had no right of appeal. The Supreme Court ruled that because we had sought to intervene and sought to participate at every step of the level, we had a right to appeal, and furthermore, ruled against the PUC on the ad campaign. So the point is that in order to be involved, in order to have any chance on participating in any decision-making, either people have to intervene or they have to form organizations that intervene. For a long time, the only public interest voice at the Public Utilities Commission was Life of the Land. About 10 years ago, we brought in Sierra Club as a witness in one of our cases. And more recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, Sierra Club has intervened. The only other community groups are Friends of Lanai, a small group on Lanai, Punapono Alliance, and Clay Miley Ali Hawaiian Civic Club. The last two, I've represented the Hawaiian Civic Club, and Punapono has found it difficult to come over to Hawaii for hearings. So I've been appointed an assistant vice president of Punapono Alliance so that I can represent them in the hearings. Under PUC rules, any group that intervenes, you can intervene as an individual, even though it's extremely rare, but they allow individuals in. You can intervene as a association, even if you're just an ad hoc group that has come together for the sake of intervening. You can intervene as an association. You can intervene being represented by an attorney or an officer. You can have an association just appoint somebody as an officer so they can represent the organization at the PUC. But you have to have some group intervene, and you have to have some presence to affect the outcome. You have a question?
I just, about 20 years ago, my condo, which has electricity, everybody pays the same electricity. They wanted to do a cogeneration system. And what happened was I'm not really positive, but this is what I heard. We were told that the electric company would take us off the grid if we did it, and so then if something happened with the cogeneration, we wouldn't get any electricity. We would try to get more information, and we found the guy who proposed it said that they had actually put a cogeneration system in at the city, and it would practically free electricity. And but then there was some lawsuits, so they never used it. Do you know anything about that?
Hawaiian Electric originally wanted to put in cogeneration units at people's meters. What is cogeneration means that you put in a unit on the customer side of the meter where usually the primary output is heat and electricity is the byproduct. So you can heat all your water and do all your heating and cooling from the heating part of the generator, and you can use electricity also. The benefit about a cogeneration is that the cogenerator can be 70 to 90% efficient. That means you're getting the fuel that you're putting in, say 80, 90% of it is coming out in usable forms of electricity or heat. If you look at the old Aloha Tower power plant that HECO had down here for a number of years, that had a 22% efficiency. And it had additional line loss shipping the electricity to customers. So you can use far less fuel and be far more efficient using a cogen. And so HECO came out and said, why don't we build a whole bunch of cogen? And those companies that put in cogeneration units were like crying foul because they were saying the utility will persuade people to put in a utility system and it will crowd out the free market. The PUC ruled that if somebody wants to put in a cogen unit and if they want the utility to do it, they have to first prove that nobody else from the free market would put it in. At that point, the utilities suddenly turned around and said, we hate cogeneration. Now, Pauahi Tower in downtown, in Chinatown, has a cogeneration unit. Pohainani Retirement Home in Kaneohe has a cogeneration unit. When they put it in, they found that they were able to maintain the heat of the pool outside to a constant warm temperature, and that increased the occupancy rate. So it has side effects. A previous mayor who will be unnamed put in a cogeneration unit at City Hall that worked, and the next mayor, who will be unnamed, decided that he really hated cogeneration and ripped it out. Just like at the White House, an unnamed president put solar panels on the White House, and the next president decided he didn't like solar panels and ripped them out. So when you put them on city buildings, it's really, it can lead to problems on who you elect.
The other technology that's commonly used here in Hawaii is actually heat pumps. And compared to cogeneration, the heat pump wins hands down because it has an efficiency of 400% versus the 30 and 40 and hopefully 40 that cogeneration will come up with. Unfortunately, what's really happening is with the heat pumps, you're just moving heat from the air into what you really want to heat, which is, in this case, water. And the waste product, by the way, is air conditioning or cooling. And so, I mean, a lot of these solutions or dichotomies turn out not to be true dichotomies. There are, when you actually get into the details of the technologies, you realize that there are a lot of different considerations. And for some people, one solution is better than others. For example, the heating of the pool. Well, nobody with a heat pump would even dream of heating a pool.
You can put pipes in the ground underneath buildings because there's a fairly constant temperature of the earth a few feet down, few fathoms down, whatever. And you can, during warm weather, export heat from the house to the ground, and during cooler weather, bring heat up from the ground into the house. You can do it with heat pumps. There are a whole variety of ways of moving heat around. And they all really fit under energy efficiency, how you do things on your own side of the meter to decrease your own energy bill. And for many years, Hawaiian Electric fought that tooth and nail, any kind of energy efficiency. And that's why the Public Utilities Commission actually removed energy efficiency from the utility and gave it to another entity, which at that time had a very confusing name, Hawaii Energy, because everybody confused it with Hawaii Electric. But they're an entity in Honolulu that enables people to install energy efficiency. And really, before you even talk about putting solar panels on your roof or any other solution, the cheapest alternative always is energy efficiency. It's replacing, I mean, if you think back to the old, at least when I was young, you have cooking ovens for little kids on how they make cookies with little heating ovens. And those worked on the simple principle that the old light bulb that you used to screw into the wall, 93% of what was produced was heat and 7% was electricity. So you could cook with your light bulb and you could buy electricity to put in an air conditioner to remove the excess heat. And now we've gone to CFLs and now LEDs. So heat movement, there are a lot of ways that should be incorporated in that we don't.
You mentioned that it's important for us not to be on the sidelines. So my question is about that. I did go to the hearing that the PUC held at McKinley High School and spoke there. But from what I understand, the series of, I don't know what they're called now, are they sessions that the PUC is holding on this issue? You can go and watch, but unless you're an intervener, you can't really speak. I guess they're going to be on Olelo so we can watch them. But I guess my question is, so how can we stay off the sidelines as general members of the public and maybe advocacy organizations that may not be interveners during this next phase?
The Public Utilities Commission divided this next era hearing process up into two parts. Normally, there's very little chance for non-parties to participate. So they specifically held a series of listening sessions around the islands that was unheard of in terms of their own history. to gauge how people across the state were feeling about it. The Public Utilities Commission is a very quasi-judicial proceeding. When we're in formal hearings, parties wear suits and ties or dresses or pantsuits or whatever. It is like a trial. Normally, it does not involve as many parties. It's never involved as many parties as we have in this proceeding. But traditionally, you go through a whole series of discovery where you ask other sides questions and they have to answer it and they have to produce documents. And then you submit testimony, and then you submit rebuttal testimony and all of that. And then you have more questions based on the testimony. Then you have witnesses actually appear. And in this proceeding, Hawaiian Electric's witnesses will take the stand first. So the first witness, and a witness, I should say, a witness is considered an exhibit. So when you submit testimony, you also submit a whole bunch of documents with it, but the testimony is one exhibit number, then the documents each have their exhibit number, then the next testimony has an exhibit number. So Alan Oshima happens to have the lowest exhibit number of any HECO witness. So Alan Oshima is going to take the witness stand first. Now, in some hearings, each side gets to have an opening statement made, but with so many parties, the PUC has asked for pre-hearing briefs rather than opening statements. In some hearings, the first witness that takes the stand summarizes in 5 minutes what his testimony is going to be. But since everybody knows what his testimony is going to be because it's all been filed and it's written, the first witness takes the stand and they immediately go into cross-examination. So starting with the consumer advocate, the way they've worked it is Alan Oshima takes the witness stand, and then 26 parties get to ask him questions. And each party gets 15 minutes to ask whatever questions they want. Now, it's not done the Perry Mason style on TV. Nobody jumps up and confesses. That doesn't happen. And very rarely does any person asking a question ask a question they don't know the answer to. You don't say to a witness, I don't know this, will you elaborate on it? Because then they can add all kinds of things you never thought of and stack their case and make themselves look brilliant, and suddenly you're screwed. So you only ask questions that you know the answers to, and you want them to admit to things that will bolster your case. So each party can spend up to 15 minutes asking questions for Alan Oshima. You don't have to ask questions. If the flow of questions are going a little bit longer, the hearing officer can allow it to go more than 15 or less than 15. You get all the way down to the last questioner asking Alan Oshima questions, then you go back to the top. And now each party gets 10 minutes to ask. And you go all the way down, then you go back to the top. And that way, Olelo isn't just filming one person asking one witness questions for 3 hours, but you see some diversity going on. It also helps that when one party is asking questions, another party may suddenly get an idea, and therefore you have some interaction going on. So Alan Oshima may take an entire day on the witness stand. He may take 2 days. Nobody knows. But at some point, when the questions become repetitive, the hearing officer will say, okay, we've had enough, we're going to the next witness. The second witness will be Eric Leeson from NextEra. Now, it's interesting that of the 14 witnesses being put on by HECO and NextEra, the witness who is carrying the bulk of their case is a guy named John Reed. He's only witness number 6 on the list. So every party that wants to ask anybody questions is going to ask him questions, but nobody knows what day his questions are going to be coming to him. So the hearing lasts 12 days, And the first 8, at least, will probably be questions to the HECO and Nextera witnesses. Then the consumer advocate will take the stand, and they will be questioned only by Hawaiian Electric. Now, Life and Land has filed a motion, and we've documented motions filed with the PUC that we believe that any adverse witness should be cross-examined by any adverse party. That is, if the consumer advocate puts up a witness that we personally feel that their testimony is adverse to our position, that we have a right to cross them. We believe that the law and the Constitution and the Supreme Court have backed that up. The Commission has ruled that we don't have that right. So for now, that's not an issue. But if this case is appealed, it does become an issue. And before people react on whether it will be appealed or not, the PUC can rule one of 3 things. They can rule it's accepted as is, it's rejected as is, or it's approved with conditions. If it's approved with conditions, Nextera can say we accept or we reject, or we can accept some of them and ask you to reconsider others. But if, when it's finally done at the PUC, if Nextera feels that they have not gotten what they wanted to, they can appeal it. Now, if they don't appeal it and they walk away, there's a question of the $90 million price tag hanging over their heads. They basically have a sword right now over their heads that if they don't do everything possible to make the deal go through, they owe HECO $90 million. So they might be forced to appeal. On the other hand, if the PUC approves it with conditions and they accept, some parties feeling that it was unacceptable may appeal. So it's very likely that it would be appealed. And if you consider things like Pennsylvania, where the PUC there ruled on something, it was overturned by Circuit Court and re-overturned by the Supreme Court. So in our case, the appeal would go either directly to the Supreme Court or stop at the ICA, the Intermediate Court of Appeals, first. So we're at the beginning stages of what could be very interesting. So after all the HECO witnesses take the stand, then the consumer advocates witnesses take the stand and are cross-examined by HECO. And then all the other parties go, and there's a prescribed order. And you would assume that if the PUC has set there's only 12 days for the hearings, and the parties have not you haven't gone through the entire list, either the PUC has to extend it, curtail it, or Nextera loses the chance to cross-examine certain parties at the end of the list. And one of the parties at the end of the list is Hawaii Gas. Now, Hawaii Gas just recently submitted 11,000 pages of confidential documents. And they're having a war with Hawaiian Electric right now. The war is interesting because Hawaiian Electric proposed with Hawaii Gas to bring liquefied natural gas into this state. Now, groups like Life Land feel that liquefied natural gas is a disaster because of the methane gas being released from the fracking process, and therefore we don't want it. But HECO and Hawaii Gas want to bring it in together. And I can't tell you the exact percentage of the imports that each one wanted to bring in because that's confidential. We know it, we just can't talk about it. But what's fairly obvious is the bulk would be by HECO and the smaller amount would be by Hawaii Gas. And what Nextera came in, they said, we have a deal with HECO, but we don't want to partner with Hawaii Gas. So Hawaii Gas has an adverse position that if Nextera takes over HECO, they lose on the importation of LNG if it's permitted in bulk. The consumer advocate is part of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. It's technically called the Division of Consumer Advocacy, or Consumer Advocate. It used to be, for a long time, that the consumer advocate, the executive director of the consumer advocate, reported to the head of DCCA, who then reported to the governor. There has been a slight bypass that the CA really reports to the governor. He's really the governor's man in this case. And the consumer advocate practically always deals only with rates. And they have done Their position right now is that the deal as structured is bad, 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 and that there are a whole bunch of rate issues that are simply wrong. Now, there are two other state agencies in it, DBED and the Office of Planning, which happens to be an attached agency to DBED. And so their positions are both that it's really bad. In fact, all the parties to varying degrees think it's bad. A few parties are willing to say that it might work out in the future, but some are categorically opposed. Life Land is categorically opposed. The County of Maui thinks it's a bad idea. DBED thinks it's a bad idea. There's a whole bunch. So, but part of it is the game where Nextera comes in and offers a minimal item, chips away at some of the parties, goes through an evidentiary hearing, and then sweetens the deal. And that's what's being done on some other mergers across the country. So they can sweeten the deal, then you can have another hearing, then they can sweeten the deal and have another hearing and working it out. And that may be what they're trying to do. Is there one last final question, or should I wrap it up? Okay, wrapping it up. So I can be contacted at henry.lifeoftheland@gmail.com. I am contacted by people from kindergarten to lawyers, so feel free. And it's a really exciting and dynamic period that we're facing, and it's important that everybody gets involved. And